5 strange things that mean he's falling hard for you before he said, "I love you." Welcome to Wise Life After 60. So grateful to have you here. Have you ever noticed that when a man truly begins to fall in love, he rarely says it directly? Instead, he starts to act differently. He hesitates when he didn't before, gets quieter in moments he used to fill with words, and sometimes does things so odd that they almost confuse you. It's as if love, when it enters a man's heart, rearranges his rhythm, not through grand gestures, but through small, almost hidden signs. In today's video, we'll uncover 5 of those strange, unexpected things men do when they're falling hard, even when they try to hide it. You may just recognize them in someone who's quietly been showing you more than words ever could. Before we begin, tap that like button and subscribe to Wise Life After 60, where we explore timeless reflections on love, life, and the deeper wisdom that grows with age. Here, we don't chase excitement, we uncover truth. Now, let's begin with the very first thing every grounded, self-assured woman notices long before a man ever says the words, "I love you." Thing number 1, he becomes awkward around you. One of the strangest things that happens when a man begins to fall deeply in love is that he suddenly forgets how to be smooth. The confidence he has with others starts to dissolve the moment you walk into the room. Words stumble, jokes fall flat, and the man who once seemed composed begins to look a little awkward. It might sound amusing, but behind that clumsiness lies something real and powerful. Psychology calls it limbic dissonance, the emotional conflict between wanting to stay in control and the vulnerability of caring too much. When a man starts to feel something genuine, his nervous system betrays him. His usual rhythm breaks. He overthinks his gestures, worries how he's being perceived, and sometimes even avoids eye contact, not because he isn't interested, but because he's overwhelmed by how much he is. I once knew a couple in their late 60s who met at a small local concert on a breezy autumn evening. She was recently retired, elegant in her simplicity, a linen scarf, silver hair tied loosely, that kind of quiet grace that turns heads without trying. He was a widower, reserved but kind, the sort of man who had lived long enough to stop pretending and yet still carried the softness of someone who believed in second chances. When she told me about that night, she laughed gently. She said, "I thought he wasn't interested. He dropped his coffee twice, couldn't stop fiddling with his watch, and barely said a word through the entire intermission." At the time, she assumed his silence meant disinterest, that familiar story women tell themselves when faced with uncertainty. But as the weeks went on, she began to notice little things that contradicted her first impression. He would remember what song she had hummed that evening. He'd send her articles about the composer they listened to. He never flirted directly, yet every gesture seemed to say, "I'm paying attention." Months later, when they finally spoke about it, he confessed, "I wasn't quiet because I didn't care. I was quiet because I didn't trust myself to speak without giving everything away." Those words stayed with her, and with me, because they reveal something profound about the psychology of love, especially for men. Beneath every awkward silence or clumsy gesture lies an invisible trembling, the fear of being seen too deeply, too soon. It's not a lack of confidence, it's a sudden realization that the stakes have changed. He told her later, "I wasn't nervous because I didn't know what to say. I was nervous because for once I cared how it sounded." That single sentence carried a lifetime of meaning. It wasn't the language of a shy man. It was the confession of someone who had lived enough to understand that real affection asks for authenticity, not performance. For many women, especially those of us who've lived through the long arc of love, marriages, heartbreaks, rediscoveries, it's easy to misread quiet awkwardness as detachment. But more often than not, it's sincerity, learning how to breathe. When a man's heart starts to open, his ego begins to loosen, and in that loosening, he fumbles. It's a beautiful kind of imperfection, the moment where control gives way to care. So when you see a man hesitate, when he stumbles over his words or loses his usual confidence, try to see beyond the surface. What looks like confusion may actually be reverence. What sounds like silence may be the sound of someone trying, with all his heart, not to ruin what feels too rare to rush. Because love, especially at this stage of life, is not about grand declarations anymore. It's about the quiet awe of finding someone who still makes you nervous even after all the years and lessons behind you.
Thing number 2. He challenges you in unexpected ways. Not in a harsh or argumentative way, but in small, unexpected moments where their curiosity becomes sharper, almost protective. A man who's falling doesn't just want to be near you. He wants to understand how you think, what you stand for, and whether your mind can meet his full strength. Psychology calls this intellectual bonding, the stage where attraction shifts from the physical to the psychological. It's when admiration begins to form roots in respect. Many women mistake this behavior for confrontation, but in truth, it's an unconscious test of depth. The man who challenges you is, in his own way, revealing that he values your mind enough to engage it. When a man begins to fall for you, he stops performing and starts observing. He notices your opinions, your reactions, your quiet convictions. He may ask questions he never dared to ask before about your past, your beliefs, your fears, not to judge, but to find alignment. Love for him becomes less about flattery and more about compatibility of thought. The ancient Stoics often wrote that dialogue is the purest form of love, because it reveals not who we pretend to be, but who we truly are when seen and heard. Seneca said, "No one can love wisely unless they love what they can also respect." The same truth applies here. When a man challenges you gently, he is trying to see if your heart and your intellect speak the same language as his. For women who have lived through decades of relationships, this kind of challenge can feel unsettling, especially when we've grown accustomed to harmony over debate. But the truth is, a love worth keeping will sometimes press against your edges, not to break you, but to see if you'll stand beside him as an equal, not beneath him as comfort. So if you find a man who listens closely, who dares to disagree respectfully, who engages your thoughts rather than flattering your silence, pay attention. It's not arrogance, it's intimacy, seeking truth. And in the comments below, share a moment when someone truly saw your mind, not just your smile, and how that changed the way you viewed love. Someone reading your story today might find courage to wait for that kind of connection, too. Thing number 3. He remembers the smallest details. Another strange and beautiful thing a man does when he's falling deeply in love is that he begins to remember everything, the smallest, almost invisible details that you didn't even realize you'd shared. The kind of things that no one else would notice, but somehow he does.
The way you stir your tea before every sip. The story you told once about your favorite teacher. The scent of the hand cream you use, or how you pause before answering a question when you're thinking carefully. I once spoke with a woman named Margaret, a retired piano teacher, who met someone later in life after many years of being alone. She told me that at first she didn't believe he was serious. He was quiet, thoughtful, a little reserved, not the kind of man who showered her with compliments or dramatic promises. But one afternoon they were having coffee together, and he said something that stopped her heart for a moment. He mentioned a melody she used to hum absent-mindedly while waiting in line at the grocery store, something she'd done without even knowing it. I realized then, she said, that he was paying attention to who I am when I'm not performing, when I'm just being. That is the essence of love in its mature form. It isn't about constant declarations or grand displays. It's about presence, attention. When a man begins to notice the quiet details of your world, it's because his heart is no longer watching you from a distance. It's already entered your rhythm. Psychologists refer to this as empathic mirroring, the unconscious way people in love begin to reflect one another's emotional patterns. But in philosophy, this has always been called reverence, the kind of awareness that arises when we begin to see the divine in another person's ordinary moments. Margaret told me that in her first marriage, her husband had been kind, but distracted, always rushing, always busy. This new man was different. He saw her not as a role to fill, but as a world to explore. It wasn't romance that made me trust him. It was the way he listened to my silences. That is how love often looks in the later chapters of life. Not as intensity, but as attention. Not as flattery, but as familiarity. When a man is falling in love, he begins to memorize the world of the woman he admires. The details, the pauses, the laughter that returns him to peace. So if a man remembers the smallest things, what you said months ago, the color of your scarf, the sound of your laugh, understand that it's not a coincidence, it's devotion, spoken in the language of noticing. Thing number 4. He starts to let down his guard. A man's strength has long been defined by control, by his ability to stay calm, decisive, and unshaken. But when love enters his life, something shifts. Psychology calls this emotional disarmament, the process of softening, where the armor that once protected him begins to feel unnecessary. He may begin to talk about his fears, his regrets, or the moments in life that humbled him. And when he does, it isn't a weakness, it's trust in its purest form. For many women, especially those who've lived long enough to see the different stages of love, this moment is profound. It's when the man who seemed unreachable starts to show his humanity. It may come through a quiet confession about his past, or a story he's never told before. And in that space, he's saying something without words. You are safe enough for me to be real. Philosophers have always spoken about this moment of surrender. The Greek Stoic Epictetus wrote that true love begins when pride no longer needs to prove itself. That wisdom holds true even now. When a man begins to open up, to express doubt, vulnerability, or tenderness, it's not because he's losing control. It's because he's found someone who makes him feel whole enough to stop performing. But there's something important here, especially for women in later life. When a man begins to open his heart, meet him with calm, not with rescue.
Don't rush to solve or reassure. Simply listen. Love, at its highest level, is not about fixing another person. It's about witnessing them without judgment. When a man feels that kind of acceptance, he doesn't just fall in love, he finds peace. If you've ever rediscovered the beauty of connection by slowing down, by listening instead of reacting, or by seeing strength in someone's quiet honesty, share it in the comments. Someone watching might need to be reminded that it's never too late to open your heart again and feel seen for who you truly are.
Thing number 5. He becomes protective in quiet, unspoken ways. It's in the way he makes sure you walk on the inside of the sidewalk, the way he notices when you're tired and slows his pace to match yours, or how he calls not to check up on you, but just to make sure you made it home safely. I remember a story from a dear friend named Elaine, who met someone in her early 70s. She used to laugh when describing how old-fashioned he was. He'd insist on carrying her groceries, open every door, and once waited in his car until her lights turned on at night after driving her home. It wasn't about control, she said softly. It was his way of saying, "You matter. You're safe with me." At first, she brushed it off as courtesy. But over time, she began to see that every small gesture carried an emotional truth. He cared, even when he didn't have the words to say it. Psychology calls this protective empathy, when love turns into guardianship, not out of ownership, but devotion. A man who truly loves a woman doesn't want to take away her independence. He simply wants to make her world a little softer, a little safer, a little more certain. And yet, it's not just about safety. It's about presence. When a man is falling in love, his awareness expands to include you, your comfort, your peace. Even your smallest needs become part of his daily consciousness. He starts to think ahead, how to ease your day, how to bring you joy, not because he's obligated to, but because love has quietly rearranged his instincts. There's something profoundly human about this kind of care. In philosophy, it echoes Aristotle's belief that love is not just the desire to be loved, but the will to care for another's well-being as your own. For men who fall later in life, after the noise of ambition fades, this kind of love becomes even purer, stripped of competition, guided instead by tenderness and respect. Elaine once told me, "When I was younger, I used to mistake excitement for love. But now, I've learned that love is the quiet man who watches to make sure I get through the door safely and doesn't need to be thanked." And that is perhaps the most powerful lesson of all. True affection isn't loud. It doesn't demand recognition or applause. It reveals itself in small acts of awareness, the kind that say, "I see you, I've got you, and you're not alone anymore."
When we reach this stage of life, love takes on a different shape. It's no longer the rush of youth, nor the uncertainty of searching. It becomes gentler, quieter, but somehow deeper. The 5 strange things we explored today, his awkwardness, his curiosity, his attention to detail,
His openness and his quiet protectiveness are not random behaviors. They are the language of genuine affection, spoken through action instead of words. A man may not always say what he feels, but his instincts reveal what his pride may try to hide. The nervous laughter, the thoughtful disagreement, the careful listening, the vulnerable confession, the silent act of care. Together, they tell a story far more honest than any declaration of love could. As women, especially after 60, we begin to understand that love isn't something to chase or prove. It's something to recognize, to meet with patience, awareness, and self-respect. We no longer fall for the noise of romance. We tune into the melody of truth. And in that quiet music, we rediscover what love was meant to be all along. A meeting of two souls who have finally learned to see clearly. If this reflection spoke to your heart, give this video a like. Subscribe to Wise Life After 60 for more moments of calm and insight. And share it with someone who still believes in the beauty of love after 60. Thank you for walking this path of reflection today, and see you again in the next video.